Hero here from Umbra Games with a review of The Last of Us Remastered, exclusively for PlayStation 4. Yeah, I know it's weird that I waited so long to play through The Last of Us for the first time, for no other reason than there's just too many other games keeping me busy. The Last of Us was originally released on PlayStation 3 in June of 2013, not too long before the PS4 dropped, so Naughty Dog took some resources and groomed the game with the higher definition textures, and were even kind enough to throw in the Left Behind DLC. The Last of Us starts right before a catastrophic zombie-like sickness begins spreading through the United States. The virus spreads via spores and bodily fluids of those already infected. We catch a brief glimpse of life with Joel, and I never caught his last name and just found that the writer Neil Druckmann decided to cut all last names from the game at the last minute. So anyway, the outbreak happens along with a couple other tragic events, and we're shot 20 years into the future, where Joel has become an even harder man, gruff, and closed off from the world as much as possible. He and his girlfriend/partner Tess work under a smuggler moniker, moving items in and out of the heavily policed quarantine zones. He's eventually asked to escort a young girl named Ellie out of the city and to the headquarters of a group of rebels known as the Fireflies. So the two's journey across the United States begins. The Last of Us is a third-person, over-the-shoulder action-adventure game with heavy emphasis on stealth and survival mechanics. I think I actually described this game as if Uncharted and Resident Evil had a baby. Metal Gear Solid was its uncle. Throughout your travels, you'll encounter three forms of fungal-ravaged zombie-type creatures: runners, which listen and look for you; clickers, which have no sight but extremely acute hearing to hunt their prey; and those infected the longest turn into what they call bloaters. You also find the typical post-apocalyptic bandit waves, often armed heavily and fighting you for resources. You have a quiet sneak mode that can be activated by hitting the circle button to help you get behind your targets. Then you can grab them with the triangle, at which point you can either strangle them, which takes a little longer, by hitting square, or by using a shiv with the triangle button, assuming you have one in your inventory. If you hold R1, you can focus on hearing, which Joel must be part bat because you're actually able to see enemies through walls within a set radius. Joel carries both pistols and long weapons, and starts with one holster for each. You have to stop and pull other guns from your backpack if you need them, so being prepped for each encounter is pretty crucial. Ammo isn't overly plentiful, and each firearm requires a different type, forcing you to move back and forth between your options. I do get a little annoyed when I line up that perfect headshot that it isn't a one-hit kill, something that always bugged me about Uncharted as well, but more so here with ammo being more rare. I think internally the game drives on a hit point system, so while you get more damage for a headshot, they aren't always lethal. Melee weapons can also be found from 2x4s to baseball bats and crowbars, but as usually seen, everything deteriorates faster in the zombie apocalypse, giving you only 4 to 8 hits with a weapon before it breaks. In addition to melee weapons and firearms, there's a fairly simple crafting system that can be utilized to make medkits, shivs, and a couple different types of bombs. All crafting is done with a combination of 2 different scavenged items like rags, blades, sugar, and alcohol. As you find these items, their icon will be filled up in quarters, adding to your existing inventory, which begins with the ability to hold a maximum of 3 of each item. The finished products can also be stored at a maximum of 3, so sometimes when you come across rags and alcohol used to make medkits, you can apply one if you need some health, and then make up another to free up some crafting space. You also have to be careful though that the Molotovs and medkits both use the same materials. There are 3 forms of character progression in The Last of Us. First, Joel can scrounge for parts and then upgrade weapons at workbenches. Features like rate of fire and reload speed can be increased with a specific number of parts, but progression is also gated by the discovery of tool upgrades, I believe up to 5, opening up the increasingly powerful options. Joel can also gather pills, who knows what kind they're supposed to be, but as they accumulate can be applied to things like increasing maximum health, listening mode radius, and crafting speed. The third method of increasing Joel's strength and resistance are the training manuals he can find scattered throughout the world. Some of them are hidden pretty well, adding damage to weapons and radii to bombs. The Last of Us is comprised of several different levels in varying environments. Most levels generally only have one direction to proceed forward, and sometimes this requires finding ladders or dumpsters to climb on, and fortunately there's always a pallet nearby all water sources since Ellie can't swim. There are a lot of moments where you'll be looking for the way forward, which door might open, or which item you have to knock off a ledge, and don't forget you're playing for 2 often, making paths for your AI allies. Speaking of which, I'm not really huge on the heavier stealth mechanics in games, as in you're too fragile or the game is over when you're discovered. I actually was playing this game wrong when I first started, which made it a little bit frustrating. Figuring I had very limited resources, I tried to conserve everything I had, often not killing enemies, only to be snagged later in a one-hit kill by a clicker. The only thing worse than stealth mechanics was having 2 AI party members that you can't pass through that take your cover and often end up getting seen and engaged. Once one fungal found them, the rest would swarm. A couple scenarios I was actually able to get through the entire area without disturbing the residents, and Ellie would tell me there are too many enemies around and the game wouldn't let me proceed forward anyway, so just keep all that in mind when you choose to play. There are a couple forms of collectibles found in the game, including artifacts and documents. Some of these documents add depth to the world, finding a note on a stranger or journal in an abandoned house to figure out what's going on. There are also optional conversations between Joel and his companions if you watch carefully and happen to be looking in the direction of who's talking or the item about which they want to talk, and press the triangle button. I would stop and hit these whenever possible because of how much it did add to these well-written characters, and was a little disappointed in how easy these conversations were to miss. There is actually a trophy for finding them all. Which that leads me to the characters themselves. When I was frustrated in the stealth mechanics at times and learning how to play the game well, something that kept pulling me on was how well written this game is. I mean, the first hour had me choked up, seeing this relationship take place between Joel and Ellie, even the random characters you meet and talk with. While they often do fit some common tropes, I was very interested. It reminded me of the good episodes of The Walking Dead when they used to still encounter zombies, and seeing how the traumatic events change people, and while sometimes had negative effects, you could often see them grow. Naughty Dog may be the current top player in the cinematic action-adventure genre. There's this sense of grandeur they get that isn't limited to the Uncharted series. Unlike Uncharted though, this game earns its M for mature rating. It does not spare you from brutality. I always say that stories are better told when you run the risk of losing characters, when you don't know that everyone's going to live, and The Last of Us is brutal, both in torturing your sense of loss and often very viscerally. I'm not sure how Naughty Dog keeps pushing out the highest level of voice acting. I mean, obviously a lot of the credit goes to the talent itself, but every character feels like they could be real here, so some of that has to be attributed to the writing and production as well.
Thanks for not blowing my head off.
We'll say the one slightly disorienting part of the plot is the way time and location jumps between major events. I mean, one level will take place where you'll spend 2 hours just trying to make it to that building in the distance, and then in the blink of a cutscene, we'll move from East Coast to West Coast, like they could just hop a plane and go uneventfully. I mean, it's a minor complaint, of course. This remastered edition does include the single piece of DLC that was released called Left Behind, that shifts back and forth between one of the time periods in the game that was kind of glossed over, and pieces of Ellie's past. While the main game clocks in at about 15 hours-ish, the DLC is a 2-hour edition. There's a multiplayer mode included as well, which, I'll be honest, I didn't try, nor do I know if it's even still active at all. Read up on it a bit, and it looks like you can complete tasks that will give you extra storage for the main campaign, so while it's great to see some benefits crossing over, it wasn't for me. When you complete the game, you can go through again in a plus mode, carrying over Joel's stats and upgrades. Graphically, the game looks good, but I would say you can tell it's a new coat of paint on an existing frame. The game's musical score is very minimalistic at times, but very well matches the tension and relief moments. So if you're looking for a slightly unique zombie experience, enjoy a bit of stealth in your games and survival too, enjoy character and relationship depth, and don't mind a bit of a roller coaster of a well-written epic, aren't too frustrated by headshots that don't instant kill and melee weapons constantly shattering, then you should give The Last of Us a try. Rated as an action-adventure game, The Last of Us Remastered hits an 84 out of 100 on a true 1 to 100 scale, with 50 being an average game. This is Giro for Umbra Games. Thanks for watching. Hit the subscribe button for notifications of new videos, and I'm also on Twitter @Umbra Games.